The sun was sinking low over the quiet Texas suburb, painting the sky in shades of amber and soft violet. David Monroe gripped the steering wheel loosely, his lips curved in a gentle smile as the last chords of a country song faded from the radio. It was one of those rare days when he'd managed to leave work early, an unexpected gift. For once, traffic on the freeway wasn't a raging river of honking cars and flashing tempers. Everything felt calm, suspended, as if the world had decided to grant him one small, precious moment of peace. On the passenger seat rested a small bouquet of daisies and white roses, wrapped neatly in brown paper, along with a pink box of glazed donuts, Emily's favorite. She loved those donuts from the little bakery on Main Street, the one that always smelled like sugar and cinnamon. He'd stopped there almost on instinct, thinking how her face might light up when she saw the box. It had been a while since he'd seen that look. Lately, things between them had felt strained, like a song slightly out of tune. But today, he thought, maybe this small gesture could bring them back in sync. David had never been the romantic type, at least not the kind to write poems or plan grand surprises. His way of loving was quieter. Fixing the leak under the kitchen sink before she noticed it. Warming up her car on cold mornings. Remembering to buy her favorite coffee creamer even when it wasn't on the list. He believed love was built in the small, consistent things. And yet, as he drove home that evening, a soft ache tugged at his chest. He missed the laughter that used to fill their home, the way Emily would dance barefoot in the kitchen while cooking dinner, hair messy, humming to some old pop song. The golden light spilled across his dashboard, catching the edges of his wedding ring. He turned it absent-mindedly with his thumb. 10 years. A whole decade since that day on the church lawn when she'd walked toward him in her simple lace dress, looking like everything he'd ever dreamed of. Time had a way of slipping through your fingers, he thought. You wake up one day and realize you've become two people living side by side, sharing a roof but not always a life. Still, David was hopeful. Maybe all marriages went through quiet winters. Maybe spring could come again if you just tended the soil. That's what his father used to say, you don't quit watering the garden just because the flowers stopped blooming. The engine hummed softly as he turned onto Willow Creek Road. The neighborhood was peaceful, lawns freshly cut, kids' bicycles scattered on driveways. The scent of barbecue drifted faintly through the air, someone nearby was starting dinner early. David slowed down as his house came into view, the familiar white two-story with blue shutters and a maple tree out front. He loved that tree. Every fall it turned the yard into a sea of orange and red, and Emily always complained about the mess of leaves, but secretly, he knew she loved it too. He pictured her now, maybe curled up on the couch, watching one of those crime shows she loved, or maybe reading by the window with a glass of wine. The thought made him smile wider. He could already imagine walking through the door, holding up the flowers like a peace offering, teasing her, guess who got out early today? Then they'd share dinner, talk about their week, maybe laugh again. The sun dipped lower, its light spilling through the windshield like warm honey. David rolled down the window and let the evening air wash over him. The scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass filled the car. He felt alive, content, almost boyishly excited. For a moment, he even rehearsed what he might say, something simple, nothing dramatic. Just a husband trying to remind his wife that he still cared. As he pulled into the familiar street, the radio whispered the end of another song, something about love surviving the storms. He chuckled softly at the coincidence. Yeah, he murmured to himself, that's exactly the plan. The tires crunched gently over the gravel driveway. David turned off the engine, the sudden silence wrapping around him like a soft blanket. He glanced at the flowers and donuts one last time, straightened his shirt, and took a deep breath. Everything felt right. Peaceful. He had no idea this would be the last quiet moment before everything shattered. The sun was sinking low over the quiet Texas suburb, painting the sky in shades of amber and soft violet. David Monroe gripped the steering wheel loosely, his lips curved in a gentle smile as the last chords of a country song faded from the radio. It was one of those rare days when he'd managed to leave work early, an unexpected gift. For once, traffic on the freeway wasn't a raging river of honking cars and flashing tempers. Everything felt calm, suspended, as if the world had decided to grant him one small, precious moment of peace. On the passenger seat rested a small bouquet of daisies and white roses, wrapped neatly in brown paper, along with a pink box of glazed donuts, Emily's favorite. She loved those donuts from the little bakery on Main Street, the one that always smelled like sugar and cinnamon. He'd stopped there almost on instinct, thinking how her face might light up when she saw the box. It had been a while since he'd seen that look. Lately, things between them had felt strained, like a song slightly out of tune. But today, he thought, maybe this small gesture could bring them back in sync. David had never been the romantic type, at least not the kind to write poems or plan grand surprises. His way of loving was quieter. Fixing the leak under the kitchen sink before she noticed it. Warming up her car on cold mornings. Remembering to buy her favorite coffee creamer even when it wasn't on the list. He believed love was built in the small, consistent things. And yet, as he drove home that evening, a soft ache tugged at his chest. He missed the laughter that used to fill their home, the way Emily would dance barefoot in the kitchen while cooking dinner, hair messy, humming to some old pop song. The golden light spilled across his dashboard, catching the edges of his wedding ring. He turned it absent-mindedly with his thumb. 10 years. A whole decade since that day on the church lawn when she'd walked toward him in her simple lace dress, looking like everything he'd ever dreamed of. Time had a way of slipping through your fingers, he thought. You wake up one day and realize you've become two people living side by side, sharing a roof but not always a life. Still, David was hopeful. Maybe all marriages went through quiet winters. Maybe spring could come again if you just tended the soil. That's what his father used to say, you don't quit watering the garden just because the flowers stopped blooming. The engine hummed softly as he turned onto Willow Creek Road. The neighborhood was peaceful, lawns freshly cut, kids' bicycles scattered on driveways. The scent of barbecue drifted faintly through the air, someone nearby was starting dinner early. David slowed down as his house came into view, the familiar white two-story with blue shutters and a maple tree out front. He loved that tree. Every fall it turned the yard into a sea of orange and red, and Emily always complained about the mess of leaves, but secretly, he knew she loved it too. He pictured her now, maybe curled up on the couch, watching one of those crime shows she loved, or maybe reading by the window with a glass of wine. The thought made him smile wider. He could already imagine walking through the door, holding up the flowers like a peace offering, teasing her, guess who got out early today? Then they'd share dinner, talk about their week, maybe laugh again. The sun dipped lower, its light spilling through the windshield like warm honey. David rolled down the window and let the evening air wash over him. The scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass filled the car. He felt alive, content, almost boyishly excited. For a moment, he even rehearsed what he might say, something simple, nothing dramatic. Just a husband trying to remind his wife that he still cared. As he pulled into the familiar street, the radio whispered the end of another song, something about love surviving the storms. He chuckled softly at the coincidence. Yeah, he murmured to himself, that's exactly the plan. The tires crunched gently over the gravel driveway. David turned off the engine, the sudden silence wrapping around him like a soft blanket. He glanced at the flowers and donuts one last time, straightened his shirt, and took a deep breath. Everything felt right. Peaceful. He had no idea this would be the last quiet moment before everything shattered. The door opened with a soft creak, the kind that usually went unnoticed but now felt deafening. David stepped inside, instinctively expecting to hear the familiar hum of life, the TV murmuring in the background, the faint clatter of dishes, Emily's voice floating from the kitchen. But there was nothing. Only silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence that comes after a long day. It was heavier, thicker, as though the air itself was holding its breath. His voice sounded strangely loud in the stillness. He waited, listening. No reply. He shut the door gently behind him and stood in the entryway for a moment, adjusting his eyes to the dim light. The living room was bathed in a soft, golden haze from the last of the evening sun filtering through the curtains. Everything looked normal, at least on the surface. The throw blanket still draped over the couch, a half-read magazine on the coffee table, the faint smell of lavender from one of Emily's candles. And yet, something was off. David couldn't have said what it was exactly. Maybe it was how the candle had burned almost all the way down, its wick barely flickering. Or how the air smelled faintly of something else, something warmer, heavier. Sweat, maybe. Or perfume. He couldn't tell. He walked further in, his shoes sinking softly into the rug. The bouquet of flowers rustled faintly in his hand, their delicate scent a small, cheerful contrast to the unease coiling in his chest. He set them carefully on the coffee table, next to the donut box, and looked around. You home?" Still no answer. The only sound came from somewhere distant, a faint hum, like music. It was so soft at first that he thought he'd imagined it, but as he stood still, straining to listen, he realized it was real. A slow, rhythmic melody, coming from upstairs. Something unfamiliar. David frowned. Emily usually listened to upbeat pop songs or soft acoustic playlists when she cleaned. This sounded different. Lower. Intimate. The kind of music you played when you didn't want words getting in the way. He tried to shake off the thought. Maybe she was just taking a bath, or relaxing, trying out some new playlist. But why hadn't she answered? He glanced toward the staircase. The shadows there seemed deeper than usual, stretching long and dark across the hallway floor. The wooden steps glowed faintly under the dim light, each one like a silent invitation, or a warning. David hesitated at the bottom step. His heartbeat had started to pick up, just a little. He could feel it in his chest, steady but firm. He wasn't a paranoid man by nature, but something in the air felt wrong. He took a slow breath and started climbing. The stairs creaked softly beneath him, the sound swallowed by the music growing clearer with each step. His hand brushed against the banister, it felt warm, like it had been touched not long ago. Halfway up, he stopped, glancing over his shoulder toward the living room below. The fading sunlight painted the room in a sleepy orange glow, flowers lying there untouched. He turned back and kept climbing. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before him, bathed in dim, golden light leaking from the half-open door of their bedroom. The music was louder now, muted guitar strings and a slow beat that throbbed like a heartbeat. His own pulse seemed to sync with it, matching the rhythm without meaning to. He took another cautious step. His throat felt dry. He tried again, softer this time, almost a whisper. The music didn't stop. He noticed a trail of clothes near the door, nothing too obvious, but there was a shirt draped over the hallway chair, and something lacy peeking from under it. He blinked, frowning. His mind raced for explanations. Maybe she'd been doing laundry. Maybe she'd just changed. But the air, it carried a warmth that made his stomach twist. He stood just outside the door now, close enough to see the faint flicker of movement through the crack. The scent of Emily's perfume, jasmine and vanilla, hung thick in the air, but mixed with something else, something undeniably human. His fingers hovered near the doorknob. The music pulsed. The room beyond seemed alive. David swallowed hard, a chill crawling up his spine even as his palms began to sweat. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. He didn't want to believe the thought that had begun forming, uninvited, in the back of his mind. This was Emily. His wife. The woman he'd shared his life with for 10 years. He forced a shaky laugh under his breath, trying to dispel the tension that gripped his chest. "You're being stupid," he whispered. "There's a reason. There's always a reason." But as he took one slow step closer, the floorboard creaked, and for the briefest second, the music stopped. David froze. Then it resumed, louder this time, as if someone inside had turned the volume up just enough to drown out the sound. He stood there, heart hammering, hand trembling near the doorknob, caught between the desperate hope that he was wrong and the terrible certainty that he wasn't. The air felt heavy, electric, waiting. And for the first time that night, David felt afraid of what he might find on the other side of that door. David stood frozen in the hallway, his breath shallow and uneven. The music had returned, soft, slow, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the quiet hum of the house. It was faint, but he could hear it clearly now. Every note seemed to vibrate against the walls, seeping under the door of the bedroom at the end of the hall. He told himself again that he was overreacting. That there could be a dozen normal explanations. Maybe Emily was watching a movie, or maybe she'd invited a friend over and forgot to mention it. But then his eyes landed on something by the base of the wall, Jason's work boots. They sat neatly beside each other, dusted with dry mud, as if someone had just stepped out of them. David's stomach dropped. He knew those boots. Jason wore them everywhere, to fishing trips, weekend barbecues, even when they fixed the fence together last month. They were unmistakable. And they were here, in his hallway, right outside his bedroom. The air in the house suddenly felt too thin. David's pulse quickened, his ears beginning to ring. He took a slow, unsteady breath and tried to quiet the noise in his head. His hand brushed against the wall as he steadied himself. Beneath his palm, the drywall was warm. He could hear something else now. Not just the music. Whispers. They were faint, almost lost beneath the melody, but they were there, soft, uneven, close. The kind of hushed voices that didn't belong in a conversation, but in secrecy. He couldn't make out the words, only the tones. One was low, rough. The other softer, breathy. They rose and fell in a rhythm that made his chest tighten. David's heart pounded against his ribs. He took a step closer to the bedroom door. The floorboards creaked softly beneath his weight, the sound slicing through the air. He froze, waiting. Inside, the whispers stopped. The music kept playing. He waited for what felt like forever, the silence pressing in on him. Then came a sound, barely there at first, but unmistakable. A muffled laugh. A woman's laugh. Emily's. David's mouth went dry. The sound was gentle, quiet, but it hit him like a punch. He felt something inside him twist, a slow, cold dread crawling up from the pit of his stomach. He took another step, this one heavier, slower. From behind the door came a faint thud, like someone shifting quickly on the bed. The sound was followed by a low murmur, Jason's voice. David's mind flooded with images he didn't want, flashes of something that couldn't be real. No. It couldn't be. Jason wouldn't, Emily wouldn't. But the sounds didn't stop. The laughter returned, softer now, muffled. Then a sharp inhale, a gasp. David's hands began to tremble. The world around him narrowed to the few feet of space between himself and the door. The walls felt closer. The light from the bedside lamp inside leaked through the crack beneath the door, a thin strip of gold cutting across the hallway floor. Dust floated through it like tiny ghosts. He could hear his heartbeat, fast and uneven, in his ears. It drowned out everything for a moment until, another sound. A quiet moan. David's breath caught. His whole body went rigid. For a long time, he didn't move. Didn't breathe. The truth he'd been fighting to deny was now right there, alive in the air, impossible to ignore. Every instinct in him screamed to turn around, to walk away before he saw something he couldn't unsee. But another part of him, stubborn, desperate, burning with confusion, needed to know. He stepped forward again. The door loomed inches from his face. He could see a faint reflection of himself in the brass doorknob, his own eyes wide and hollow, his jaw clenched tight. The whispers resumed, urgent now. The bed creaked. A muffled sigh escaped through the air. David felt the last of his denial crumble. His chest tightened, breath shuddering as the truth settled in, cold and merciless. He wanted to scream, to burst through the door, to demand an explanation that could somehow make this not what it was. But his voice was gone. Instead, he stood there in silence, the flowers and donuts downstairs forgotten. The music changed, softer now, fading into a hush. And in that silence, he could hear everything he wasn't supposed to. He took one more step closer, close enough to touch the door. His fingers hovered over the handle, shaking. Every memory, the laughter, the trust, the years, flashed through his mind like quick cuts from a movie he could no longer watch. His throat burned. His chest ached. But somewhere beneath the heartbreak, something else began to rise, a flicker of anger, sharp and alive. The kind of anger that comes only when love has been betrayed. David closed his eyes, breathing through his nose, jaw locked tight. When he opened them again, there was no hesitation left. The whispers inside had turned into quiet gasps. The music reached its final note and fell silent. And in that silence, David's hand tightened around the doorknob. He was done wondering. He was going to see. The morning after the argument, Amelia woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her heart was still sore from the fight with Ethan. She reached for the phone, expecting it to be another message from him, maybe an apology. But instead, what she saw made her blood run cold. There were hundreds of notifications, texts, missed calls, social media mentions. Her best friend, Lily, had sent over a dozen messages. "Amelia, don't go online. It's bad. Call me right now." Amelia's hands trembled as she unlocked her phone and opened Instagram. Her entire feed was flooded with posts about Ethan, and her. Someone had leaked a video of Ethan in a hotel room, half-dressed, with another woman. The caption read, "The perfect couple. Think again." The woman's face was blurred, but Ethan's wasn't. His wedding ring gleamed under the hotel's dim light. Amelia's stomach turned. She couldn't breathe. The walls of her bedroom felt like they were closing in. For a moment, she thought she was going to faint. Then came the comments, thousands of them. Some pitied her, others mocked her. Strangers dissected her marriage like it was a TV drama. Her pain had become public entertainment. When she tried to call Ethan, he didn't pick up. The next time she checked social media, Ethan had turned off his comments and gone silent. That only made things worse. People started speculating. Gossip pages claimed Amelia had known about the affair and kept quiet to protect her image. Others accused her of being too cold, saying that's why Ethan had looked elsewhere. By noon, paparazzi were camped outside her building. Amelia had to sneak out the back door just to get to her car. Her phone kept buzzing, but she turned it off. She couldn't handle one more message, one more headline, one more lie. She drove aimlessly for hours, until she found herself parked near the ocean, the same spot where she and Ethan had gone on their first date. The waves were calm that day, but her thoughts were not. She replayed every moment of their marriage in her mind, wondering when everything had started to fall apart. Was it when Ethan began staying late at work? When he stopped asking about her day? Or when she convinced herself that love was supposed to hurt sometimes? As she stared at the horizon, a single thought surfaced: he did this to us. That night, Ethan finally called. His voice was hoarse, panicked, almost desperate. "Amelia, please, you have to believe me. It's not what it looks like." She laughed bitterly. "Not what it looks like? Ethan, the entire world just saw you in bed with someone else. It was a setup. Someone recorded me without my knowledge. I made a mistake, yes, but I never meant to hurt you. Please, we can fix this." "Fix this?" She cut him off. "You didn't just break our marriage. You humiliated me. You turned me into a headline. There was silence on the other end. Then Ethan whispered, I'm sorry. But it sounded small, too small to mend what he had shattered. The next day, Amelia met with a lawyer. She didn't tell Ethan. She didn't even tell Lily. It was a quiet decision, one that came from exhaustion rather than anger. She was tired of defending someone who didn't defend her. Tired of loving someone who treated love like a game. When she left the lawyer's office, the sun was setting. For the first time in weeks, she felt something like peace, fragile, but real. That evening, she posted a single message on her social media. The truth will always come to light. I won't be silenced anymore. It went viral within minutes. Some people cheered her strength, others speculated what she would do next. But Amelia didn't care. She had spent too long living for other people's opinions. Now, she was finally reclaiming her voice. And though the world still whispered about her pain, she was no longer listening. The storm that had once threatened to destroy her was slowly becoming the fire that would set her free. The morning light crept through Amelia's curtains, but she barely noticed. The sleepless nights had blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion. The world outside was still buzzing about Ethan's scandal, every tabloid, every talk show, every gossip channel had something to say. Yet, inside her apartment, everything was eerily quiet. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the steaming cup of coffee she'd poured but hadn't touched. Her lawyer's documents lay in front of her, crisp, cold papers that would officially end her marriage. The words, petition for divorce, seemed to scream at her from the page. Her phone vibrated again. It was her publicist. Amelia almost ignored it, but after a deep breath, she answered. Amelia, the voice said softly, we need to make a statement today. If you stay silent, they'll write the story for you. She knew they were right. For days, rumors had twisted the truth, claims that she was forgiving Ethan, that she was leaving the country, even that the whole scandal was a publicity stunt. None of it was true. But in a world where perception was more powerful than truth, silence had become its own kind of lie. Okay, Amelia said quietly. Draft something for me. But it has to be my words. Not PR words. She wanted it to come from her heart, the part that was still bruised but not broken. 2 hours later, she stood in front of the mirror, wearing a simple white blouse. No makeup, no jewelry, no mask. Just her. She set up her phone and pressed record. For a moment, she stared at her own reflection, unsure if she could actually do this. Then she began to speak. Hi, everyone. I never thought I'd have to make a video like this, but here we are. The last few weeks have been painful, not just because of what happened, but because of how public it became. A marriage is supposed to be private. But mine became a story that everyone watched unfold. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. I want to make one thing clear, I did not deserve what happened to me. No one does. Love should never be repaid with betrayal. After much thought, I've decided to end my marriage with Ethan. This isn't a decision made in anger, but in acceptance. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to protect your peace. She paused, letting the silence speak for her. To everyone who's sent me love, thank you. To those who've judged me, I understand. We all see the world through our own pain. But I hope one day, you'll understand that healing starts when we stop clinging to what hurt us. She ended the recording and sat there in silence for a long moment. Then she uploaded it, no music, no edits, just raw honesty. Within minutes, it began to spread. The reactions were overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in. Women thanked her for her courage. Men apologized on behalf of the ones who had broken trust. Some even said her words helped them leave their own toxic relationships. Amelia didn't respond to any of it, but she read every message with quiet gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Meanwhile, Ethan's team tried to do damage control. He released a statement too, taking full responsibility for his actions and asking for privacy. But the internet had already moved on. The narrative had shifted. It was no longer about his mistake, it was about her strength. Days later, Amelia packed her bags and left the apartment she once shared with him. As she walked through the empty rooms, memories flooded her, laughter in the kitchen, late-night talks on the balcony, the warmth that used to live here. But she didn't cry this time. She had already shed enough tears. When she stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter. The cameras were still there, but she didn't hide. She looked straight ahead, chin lifted, eyes steady. As she drove away, she whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." The world would remember her story as one of betrayal. But she knew, deep down, it was actually a story of rebirth, of a woman who lost everything and found herself again. And somewhere far behind her, in a city full of noise and gossip, Ethan watched her video alone. For the first time, he realized what he had truly lost, not just a wife, but the only person who had ever loved him without condition. But by then, it was too late. Amelia had already chosen peace over pain. The weeks that followed were quiet, painfully quiet at first. Amelia had left behind the noise, the chaos, the interviews, and the pitying stares. She rented a small cottage on the outskirts of Austin, surrounded by fields and the soft hum of crickets at night. It was the kind of place where no one recognized her, where the air smelled like rain and wildflowers, and where she could finally hear her own thoughts again. Every morning, she brewed coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. There was something healing about the simplicity, no headlines, no cameras, no questions. Just the sound of her breath, steady and alive. For the first time in years, she was alone, but not lonely. Still, healing wasn't a straight line. Some days she woke up feeling light, almost free. Other days, the memories came crashing back, Ethan's laugh, the way he used to hold her hand, the night she found out the truth. Those days hurt the most. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, like someone had stolen the version of her that believed love was safe. One afternoon, Amelia drove into town to restock on groceries. As she waited in line, a woman in her 50s turned to her and smiled. "You're Amelia, right? I saw your video." Amelia froze for a second, unsure of what to say. The woman reached over and gently touched her arm. "Thank you," she said softly. "I left my husband after 20 years because of that video. You gave me the courage." The words hit Amelia like sunlight through clouds. That night, she sat on her porch again, staring at the stars, realizing something profound: maybe her pain wasn't wasted. Maybe it was meant to help others find their own way out of darkness. She began journaling, at first just for herself. She wrote about the anger, the guilt, the quiet victories of making it through each day. But soon, the words turned into something more. She began writing about healing, about the strength that comes when you choose yourself after being broken by someone else. Her publicist reached out weeks later with an idea. "Amelia, your story has touched millions. What if you wrote a book? Not about the scandal, but about the healing?" She hesitated. The idea scared her. Writing it all down, revisiting those memories, it meant bleeding all over again. But deep down, she knew it was time. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding. Days turned into weeks. Her small wooden desk became her sanctuary. She wrote late into the night, candlelight flickering as she poured her soul onto the page. Each chapter felt like another piece of her heart mending itself. The book wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Ethan. It was about the universal ache of being betrayed, and the quiet, powerful journey of becoming whole again. She titled it, "What's Left of Me." When the book was released 6 months later, it sold out within days. Readers from around the world shared their own stories, of heartbreak, of healing, of rediscovery. Amelia didn't expect fame again, she expected closure. But what she found was something better, connection. One evening, during a small signing event in a cozy bookstore, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your words saved me," she whispered. Amelia smiled, her own eyes glassy. "No," she said gently, "you saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." That night, Amelia walked home under a Texas sky filled with stars. The wind carried the scent of rain, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt whole. Back in her cottage, she found one of the last photos she had of Ethan and her, smiling, younger, naive. She didn't cry. She simply placed it in a drawer, closed it softly, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how strong I am." Healing hadn't been about forgetting. It was about remembering, and choosing peace anyway. Amelia sat on the porch once more, wrapped in a blanket, sipping her tea as dawn began to break. The horizon glowed with promise, and in that golden silence, she realized something simple but powerful. She had survived the storm. And now, she was learning how to dance in the sunlight again. It had been nearly a year since Amelia's world had shattered and remade itself. The woman who once trembled at the sound of her own name in the news was now calm, grounded, and quietly powerful. Her book, What's Left of Me, had not only become a bestseller but a lifeline for countless readers who saw their own pain reflected in her words. She had built something new, a life not defined by betrayal, but by strength. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, the past came knocking again. Amelia was watering the potted lavender by her window when her phone buzzed on the table. It was early, too early for work emails or calls. She reached for it absent-mindedly, and froze. Ethan. The name glowed on her screen like a ghost. Her heart gave a small, reluctant jolt. For a moment, she just stared at it, the air in the room suddenly too still. She hadn't blocked him, not because she wanted to hear from him, but because she'd made peace with the idea that she didn't need to run anymore. Her thumb hovered over the notification. One message. Just 5 words. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" Amelia set the phone down and stepped back, exhaling slowly. Memories came uninvited, his voice, his laughter, the night everything fell apart. For months, she had dreamed of him apologizing. But now that it had actually happened, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like reopening a wound that had already healed. She didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. But his messages kept coming. Each one gentler, more desperate. "I read your book. I deserved every word. I've been in therapy. I'm not the same man anymore. You don't have to forgive me. I just need you to know I'm sorry." Amelia sat on her porch one evening, reading the messages under the dim orange glow of the sunset. The air smelled of rain and earth. She thought of how broken she had been, of how hard she had fought to rebuild her life. Did she owe him a response? Did she want one? Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "I saw your interview last week. You looked happy. I'm glad. You deserve it." She didn't expect the tears that filled her eyes. Not because she missed him, but because she finally saw the full circle of her healing. His words no longer had power over her, they simply were. She didn't need vengeance or forgiveness. What she had now was peace. That night, she sat at her desk and opened a new document. She began to type, not for the world this time, but for herself, a letter she would never send. "Ethan. I don't hate you anymore. I did, for a long time. I hated what you took from me, the trust, the love, the belief that I was enough. But hating you only kept me tied to the past. I've learned that forgiveness isn't saying what you did was okay. It's saying I'm okay despite what you did. I hope you heal. Truly. But my story doesn't belong to us anymore. It belongs to me. When she finished, she smiled faintly and closed her laptop. The letter didn't need to be sent. Writing it was enough. A few weeks later, as autumn rolled in, Amelia agreed to speak at a women's conference in Dallas. It was her first time back in the city where everything had fallen apart. She expected to feel anxious, maybe even haunted, but she didn't. The city felt smaller now, quieter. After her talk, as the crowd thinned, she spotted a familiar face lingering by the exit. Ethan. Older, thinner, his eyes softer than she remembered. He didn't approach her. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement. She returned the nod, calm and composed, then turned and walked away. No words were exchanged, but everything that needed to be said hung quietly in that moment. When Amelia stepped outside, the wind brushed against her hair, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. She smiled to herself. That brief encounter didn't stir the pain it once would have. Instead, it felt like the last page of a chapter finally closing. Back in her hotel room, she texted her publicist. The next book's title, Letters I Never Sent. Because healing, she realized, wasn't just about moving on. It was about looking back without bleeding. And for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt free, truly, beautifully free. Months passed since Ethan's final message, and that quiet moment in Dallas where two broken lives finally acknowledged what was gone. Amelia returned to her peaceful rhythm, writing, traveling, and speaking to women who saw her not as a celebrity, but as a survivor who had found grace in her scars. Her second book, Letters I Never Sent, was underway, deeper, more reflective, a collection of thoughts about forgiveness, grief, and the strange beauty of letting go. Then one morning, her publicist called with an unexpected offer. Amelia, there's a major TV network interested in doing a documentary on resilience after betrayal. They want to feature you, your books, your story, your recovery. It's a national special. Amelia hesitated. She'd spent so long reclaiming her privacy. The idea of opening old wounds again, on camera, made her chest tighten. Who else is involved? She asked. A pause. Ethan, her publicist admitted quietly. They reached out to him, too. He said he's willing to participate if you are. For a long moment, Amelia said nothing. She could almost hear her heartbeat echoing in the silence. The thought of standing in front of cameras again, with Ethan somewhere across the room, was like being asked to walk through a fire she'd already survived. I'll think about it, she finally said. That night, Amelia sat on her porch, the Texas sky burning orange with the last light of day. The breeze was soft, and the cicadas hummed a slow, familiar song. She thought about everything she'd endured, and how far she'd come. The idea of seeing Ethan again didn't terrify her anymore. It didn't even hurt. Maybe, she realized, this was one last chance to close the story properly, not for the world, but for herself. 2 weeks later, she said yes. The studio lights were harsh, the kind that revealed every detail. Amelia wore no jewelry, no dramatic makeup, just a navy blouse and the quiet confidence of a woman who had rebuilt herself. Across the room, Ethan sat in his own chair, older, humbler, his hands clasped tightly. When the cameras began to roll, the interviewer started gently. Questions about her journey, her writing, her transformation. Amelia answered with grace and calm, her voice steady. But eventually, the conversation turned to that day, the betrayal, the aftermath, the silence that followed. How did you find the strength to forgive? The interviewer asked. Amelia smiled faintly, looking down for a moment before meeting their gaze. I stopped confusing forgiveness with reconciliation, she said softly. Forgiveness is for you. It's the moment you choose peace over bitterness. It doesn't mean you have to invite the person back into your life. Ethan shifted in his seat, his eyes glistening. When it was his turn to speak, his voice cracked slightly. I destroyed something beautiful, he said. And I've lived with that every day. I didn't reach out to be forgiven. I reached out because I wanted her to know, she didn't deserve any of it. The studio went silent. Even the crew seemed to hold their breath. Amelia turned to look at him for the first time in years. There was no hatred, no anger. Just quiet understanding. I know, she said. And that's enough. The interviewer, visibly moved, asked, if you could go back, would you change what happened? Amelia took a long pause before answering. No, she said finally. Because the woman I became after all of it, she's someone I actually like. I wouldn't trade her for the girl who was still waiting to be loved. That line would later become one of the most quoted moments from the documentary. When the cameras cut, Ethan walked over slowly, uncertainly. He didn't try to hug her. He just said quietly, "You look happy." "I am," she said with a small, genuine smile. "I hope you find that too." They parted ways without drama, without fanfare. Just two people who had shared a lifetime in a different world, finally walking in peace. The documentary aired a month later. It was raw, emotional, and deeply human. Viewers called it a masterclass in grace. Amelia didn't watch it live. Instead, she took a drive through the countryside that evening, windows down, the wind in her hair. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered to herself, "It's really over." But it wasn't just an ending. It was a transformation, the moment her past stopped defining her, and her truth finally set her free. Winter had melted into spring by the time Amelia began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the fragile kind that trembles after heartbreak, but the steady, grounded kind that grows quietly, without asking for attention. The documentary had aired months ago, and life had shifted again. People recognized her sometimes, not for the scandal, not even for the books, but for the calm strength she carried. She'd become a symbol of survival, though she never asked to be one. Still, deep down, she knew that the most powerful healing doesn't happen in front of cameras. It happens in the small, unseen moments: making coffee for yourself, laughing again without guilt, learning to trust the quiet. One of those small moments happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Amelia was invited to speak at a local writers' retreat, a cozy, wood-paneled venue tucked by a lake, far from city noise. She had almost declined, craving solitude after months of attention. But something inside whispered, "Go." The retreat was intimate, filled with aspiring authors and poets who looked at her with awe. After her session ended, she lingered by the coffee table, trying to disappear into the chatter. That's when she met him, a man in his late 30s, messy brown hair, notebook tucked under his arm. "Your talk was incredible," he said, offering a warm smile. "I'm Sam." "Thank you," she replied politely, stirring her coffee. "I actually teach literature at the university nearby," he continued. "Though after hearing you, I might just switch careers and become a philosopher instead." She laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in weeks. His humor was effortless, not forced. And there was something in his eyes, not admiration, not pity, but understanding. He wasn't talking to Amelia the author or Amelia the woman who survived betrayal. He was talking to Amelia. Over the next few days, they kept running into each other, in the dining hall, by the lake, during workshops. Their conversations flowed easily, like they'd known each other in another lifetime. He asked questions that no one else did: what made her start writing before the pain? What was her favorite sound in the world? What did peace look like to her? By the end of the retreat, Sam asked if she'd like to stay in touch. "No expectations," he said. "Just coffee sometime, when you're back in town." She hesitated. The idea of coffee, so simple, so ordinary, terrified her more than any book tour ever could. But she nodded anyway. "Coffee sounds nice." Weeks passed. Coffee turned into long walks. Walks turned into laughter over dinner. Dinner turned into slow, quiet evenings spent reading on her porch while the sky turned gold. Amelia never realized how much she'd missed the feeling of being seen, not for what she'd been through, but for who she was becoming. Sam never pried into her past. He'd read her books, of course, but never asked about Ethan or the pain behind the pages. Instead, he asked about her favorite books, her garden, her plans for the future. One night, as they sat beneath a blanket of stars, Sam turned to her and said softly, "You know, everyone talks about your strength. But what I see isn't strength, it's softness that survived the fire. That's rarer." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her before. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly. "Afraid that love would always remind me of loss." He reached for her hand. "Then let's build something that doesn't hurt." That moment wasn't cinematic. There was no music, no grand gesture, just the quiet truth of two people meeting where their wounds had finally stopped bleeding. Months later, Amelia found herself smiling more often. The pain didn't vanish, it simply stopped defining her. She still wrote, still spoke at events, still received letters from women who found courage through her words. But now, when she returned home, there was warmth waiting for her, the kind that didn't demand or consume, only existed peacefully beside her own. One evening, she stood by the same porch where she'd once written about heartbreak, now watching Sam laugh as he burned dinner for the third time. She couldn't help but smile. Life had come full circle, not back to where it started, but to where it was always meant to go. As the stars appeared above the quiet Texas sky, Amelia whispered to herself, "This is what healing looks like." Not the absence of scars, but learning that love can grow gently, even after fire. The morning after the dinner was eerily silent. The sunlight that once poured warmly through the kitchen windows now felt harsh and judgmental, illuminating every crack in the once perfect home. Emily sat at the dining table, her fingers wrapped around a cold mug of coffee that she had long stopped drinking. The words, "I know," still echoed in her mind, lingering like the aftertaste of something bitter. Mark hadn't come home after the confrontation. The kids were at her mother's house, leaving the house unnervingly quiet, a quiet that forced her to face the storm within. When she heard the sound of keys jingling at the door, her stomach tightened. Mark entered slowly, looking like a man who had fought and lost a battle, eyes red, shoulders heavy, his usual confidence replaced by quiet shame. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, charged with all the words they hadn't said over the years. "Emily," he began softly, his voice breaking the silence like a fragile thread, "we need to talk." She looked up at him, her eyes cold but steady. "Now you want to talk," she said, her voice sharp but trembling at the edges. "After everything? After the lies?" Mark swallowed hard and nodded. "I deserve that. I deserve worse. But please, just hear me out." He sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly together as if praying for mercy. "It started months ago. I don't even know how it happened. I was lost, Emily. Work was." "Don't," she interrupted, shaking her head. "Don't you dare blame work for this. We all get lost, Mark. But not all of us destroy the people who love us when we do." He sighed, looking down. "You're right. I'm not here to make excuses. I thought I could handle it. The late nights, the pressure. I thought I was doing it all for us. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you. I stopped seeing what we had." Her heart twisted at his words, because part of her still wanted to believe him. Still wanted to hold on to the image of the man she married, the one who held her when she was scared, who made promises under a starry sky. But that man felt like a ghost now, someone she couldn't reach no matter how hard she tried. "Do you love her?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark froze. His silence was the answer she feared. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You know what hurts the most? It's not the betrayal. It's that you made me feel crazy for noticing it. Every time I asked, every time I tried to talk to you, you made me believe it was all in my head." Mark's voice cracked. I know. And I hate myself for that. I was scared, Emily. Scared of losing everything. Scared of admitting that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. She laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. You managed to lose everything anyway. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching like an eternity. The weight of their history, every anniversary, every fight, every moment of laughter, pressed heavily on them. This wasn't just a marriage breaking, it was a life unraveling thread by thread. Mark reached across the table, but she pulled her hand away. Don't, she said softly. You don't get to touch me. Not now. He nodded slowly, tears forming in his own eyes. I'll move out today, he said quietly. You deserve peace. You deserve better. Emily stared at him, her heart torn between fury and grief. You're right, she said. I do. Mark stood, glancing around the house, the family photos, the birthday drawings from the kids, the small dent on the wall from when they tried to hang their first painting. His eyes lingered on each memory like farewells carved into stone. Then, without another word, he walked out. As the door closed, Emily felt the house exhale. The silence that followed was not peaceful, it was hollow. She pressed her palms against her face and finally let the tears fall. They came in waves, uncontrollable, years of pain, confusion, and disappointment pouring out of her all at once. When she finally looked up, the morning light had softened. Through her tears, she noticed a family photo still standing on the counter, her, Mark, and the kids, smiling under a golden sunset. For the first time, she didn't feel anger. Just sadness. And maybe, buried deep beneath it, the first faint spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, the possibility of freedom. That morning, Emily made a promise to herself, this would not be the end of her story. It would be the beginning of a new one written without lies, without fear, and without the weight of someone else's betrayal. Weeks passed, and the world around Emily began to shift, slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The house that once echoed with arguments and tension now felt calmer, even though the silence still carried traces of pain. Every morning, she would wake up to the same sunlight pouring through the windows, but this time, it didn't feel harsh. It felt like an invitation, a small reminder that life was still happening, that she was still here. Mark had moved out completely. The divorce papers were in motion, and though every signature felt like closing a chapter of her soul, Emily also felt lighter with each step. There were moments of weakness, when she'd find one of his old shirts in the closet or catch herself reaching for her phone to text him something about the kids, but she stopped herself. She was learning to sit with the ache, to let it pass without trying to fix it. Healing, she realized, wasn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It was about letting it hurt, and still choosing to move forward anyway. Her days began to fill with small routines. Morning walks with her coffee. Painting classes on Tuesdays. Reading at the park on weekends. Simple things she had once pushed aside because she was too busy being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's support system. Now, she was relearning how to just be herself. One afternoon, while picking up the kids from her mother's house, her son, Ethan, ran up to her, holding a drawing. Look, Mommy. It's us, you, me, and Lily at the park. The drawing was colorful, full of messy lines and bright smiles. Emily felt her throat tighten as she looked at it. There was no trace of sadness in the picture, only warmth. It's beautiful, sweetheart, she said, hugging him tightly. I love it. Her mother watched from the doorway, her eyes soft with understanding. You're doing well, she said quietly when the kids ran off to play. I know it doesn't feel like it every day, but I can see the difference. You're stronger. Emily smiled faintly. Some days I still wake up and wonder if I made the right choice. Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. You did. You chose yourself. That's always the right choice. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Emily sat on the porch, staring at the stars. The same stars she and Mark used to look at when they were young and full of dreams. But now, they felt different, not reminders of what she'd lost, but symbols of everything she still had ahead of her. She thought about forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. For staying too long. For trying too hard. For believing that love could fix what respect had already broken. A gentle breeze brushed her hair, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight in her chest ease just a little. The past still lingered, but it no longer defined her. The next morning, she met with her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Claire who had been helping her untangle the knots of guilt and heartbreak. "You've come a long way, Emily," Claire said, jotting something down on her notepad. "When we first met, you were surviving. Now, I see someone who's beginning to live again." Emily smiled softly. "Some days it still hurts," she admitted. "It will," Claire said gently. "Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live with the memory without letting it control you." Emily nodded, her gaze distant but steady. "I think I'm starting to understand that." Later that week, she took the kids to the beach, their first real outing since everything happened. The waves crashed rhythmically, the air salty and alive. Lily built sandcastles while Ethan chased seagulls, laughing uncontrollably. Emily watched them, her heart swelling with a mixture of sadness and pride. Despite everything, her children still smiled, still dreamed. And so could she. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emily stood at the shoreline, letting the water wash over her feet. She whispered to herself, "I'm free." The words were soft, but they carried power, a declaration, a release. Behind her, the kids called her name, and she turned with a genuine smile, the first real one in a long time. The kind that reached her eyes, that wasn't forced or masked by pain. The kind that belonged to a woman who had walked through fire and come out stronger. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Emily opened her journal and wrote. "I thought losing him would destroy me. But instead, it brought me back to myself. I was never meant to be someone's shadow. I was meant to stand in my own light." And for the first time in months, she didn't cry before bed. She didn't feel empty. She simply felt alive. As she drifted off to sleep, the house no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Because Emily finally understood that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And she was walking it, one brave, beautiful step at a time.